And that jarring cacophony tells you that, yet again, you're listening to the Power of Three podcast. The podcast that's the sum of its memories, but hopefully not being whittled away piece by piece. I'm Kenny Smith, and today we're taking a look at a Fifth Doctor novel, The Ultimate Treasure, which was actually the third book in the BBC Past Doctor Adventures range. It was written by Christopher Bulis, released on the 18th of August 1997, and featured the aforementioned Fifth Doctor, but with Perry Brown. As we look at the cover, we can see there's a blue swirl that were absolutely summing up everything that the cover designers Black Sheep were doing at the time. We can see the Fifth Doctor in there. I think that's a still from Castrovalva, could be wrong. And in the background there we can see something that looks a bit like a unicorn creature, but what is it? We'll find out later on, stay tuned. As we turn the book over, we can see the publisher's summary on the back page. And it tells us, the seers of Gelsondor foretell the coming of many visitors to their planet, all in search of the lost treasure of the fabulously wealthy Rovan Cartaval, who vanished 5,000 years ago. An innocent shopping jaunt for the Fifth Doctor and Perry ends in violence and incarceration as they become caught up in a mysterious transaction involving the sale of coordinates, leading to Rovan's hoard, the ultimate treasure. The Doctor and Perry join the quest, but the Time Lord remains sceptical. What will they find, and why has it remained undiscovered for so long? The resourcefulness of the travellers is tested to the limits, as they each race to be the first to the treasure. And among a seemingly endless array of tricks, tests and traps, lurks some deadly surprises. There we go, that's summing it up quite nicely. So before we continue, let's pause briefly and speak to the man who edited this book, although he didn't commission it. It's podcast pal, Steve Cole.
Hi, I'm Steve Cole, and I was the editor of Christopher Bulis' Doctor Who, The Ultimate Treasure.
So this had been one that had been commissioned by Nuala initially, and then you picked it up further down the line.
That's right. It was the beginning of a working relationship with Chris Bulis that would last a good couple of years of my reign. Chris was always a reliable, safe pair of hands, and this was his first one for me. I don't think it was the best one he did for me, but it was a good, solid story.
I suppose that's the thing, it's that typical adventure quest thing, that's the sort of thing we got now and again. Obviously, Keys of Marinus, Key to Time, these sort of things that pop up occasionally.
Yeah, I think Chris had been maybe slightly briefed by Nuala that the books would be a little younger in feel. If Doctor Who had come back as a family show with McGann in the wake of the TV movie, then the books would have moved in a broadly younger direction than they had been under Virgin, which was one of the reasons for BBC Books' children's department taking it back, because children were the lifeblood of buying the merchandise, and obviously that was the hope that we would have a new series of Doctor Who. So I think that if it feels a little more kind of junior in concept, that's because Chris was thinking about a younger audience. As it was, that didn't transpire. We still had the same word count, and it was just the framework for that original idea that remained. But I remember Chris really liked, there's a Falstaff character in there, I think, isn't there? And I remember him saying that character had started off having quite a small part, but was kind of took over in the writing of it and started, pretty much dictating what he wanted to do in the story. So it was nice that Chris had a good time writing it, and I think that probably shows in the prose.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. Now, normally we wouldn't include a reading from one of our usual team, as the author likes to read his own excerpts, and he does them so eloquently. But we've made an exception, as this book features a journalist with his recording cameras, the Daves. That's an acronym for the Drone Audiovisual Equipment. Of course it is. Now, we're going to kick off with a reading from the book involving our very own Dave, who'll be mentioning Daves. It's Dave Steele.
Quaid urged them on into the shelter of the nearest clump of trees on the edge of the forest as the torrent descended. The fire they had been approaching was swallowed up by the downpour, and in seconds the only sign that it had existed was a pervasive odour of damp ashes. As they huddled out of the rain and wind, he tried to raise Gribbs on the comlink, but all he got was static. "Must be the change in the weather," he said aloud, more for his own benefit than the others. Silently he wondered if Gribbs had simply turned off his receiver. Perhaps he'd filled up again and didn't want to admit it. What if he'd got the ship working and decided to give up on them? No, he wouldn't do that, would he? What other surprises had Alpha left for them? Maybe the ship was booby-trapped and Gribbs had tried to take off and it had blown up. He could still see that last image of Alpha's face on the monitor. "I don't like it here," Drorgan rumbled, swinging his great head about anxiously and fingering the stock of his cannon. "It feels bad." "You don't have to like it. Just be quiet and do what you're told," Quaid shouted back. "We say what's bad around here. Others worry about us. Got it?" He was surrounded by fools, but he mustn't lose their respect. And yet it was getting harder to think of new things to say. Then he realised the doctor was looking from one to the other of them with solemn intensity. "What?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the strain. "It's begun," the doctor said. "Another form of mental attack. The opposite of what we experienced out in the mudflats, I think. You must both force yourself to remain calm, whatever stimulus you feel. Do you understand?" There was something very compelling and soothing about his voice. Quaid swallowed, forcing himself to concentrate. "You hear him, Drow? You keep cool, yeah?" "But I feel it, Quaid. It's all around us." "No, it ain't," Quaid said, very much afraid that Drorgon was right, but desperate not to show the depth of his own fear. Even as he spoke, he saw a tiny flicker of motion out of the corner of his eye that disappeared when he turned to look properly. Then there was another. Somehow he knew they were shadows of half-formed things that should never see the light of day. He drew out a torch and flicked it about after them, but they always evaded the beam. He began to flinch and jerk at the slightest movement. A heavy raindrop worked itself through the branches and landed in his cheek, where he dashed it away with a whimper of terror. Drorgon fired his cannon at something unseen out in the darkness, then shone his own torch, only to discover he had blasted their tenacious Dave drone to fragments. For a moment, that cheered him enough to force a chuckle, but the dread returned, growing deeper by the minute. The doctor was sitting with his fists clenched and his eyes shut, apparently fighting his own demons. "However real they seem, they aren't there," he said quietly, as though repeating a mantra. "I am master of my own mind." Then more loudly, "I deny you! Do you hear me?" The storm lessened, and the rain swept away, leaving a clear sky tinted by the last cold blue glow of the vanished sun. The doctor forced his eyes open, looking suddenly haggard. "I suggest we get back onto the mudflats. I think we can manage the lassitude better than this, at least until morning." "Yeah, right," agreed Quaid, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They all three made to stand up, but they couldn't. Something was wrapped around their ankles, holding them fast. With a sobbing cry, Quaid shone his torch down at their feet. Pale, glistening roots as thick as ropes were curling about their legs. Back in the stop press, Dexel Dines cursed loudly. That was the third Dave drone he had lost inside a couple of hours. His expenses for this story were going to be steep. Rapidly, he reprogrammed the second of his patrolling Daves and sent it on its way. But it would take over an hour to reach the scene of the action, and meanwhile he was as good as deaf and blind. The blank screens on his monitor array stared back at him like dead eyes. The scene of the year might be taking place somewhere out there this second, and he might miss it. That possibility was the only thing in the galaxy that really frightened him.
Thank you so much for that, Dave, and I hope you all enjoyed the Daves there as well. The other Daves, not just our Dave. Now, let's speak with the man that so many of you love to hear from, as we always get great feedback on the episodes in which he appears, as you all seem to enjoy his readings. So, let's now meet the author of The Ultimate Treasure.
My name is Christopher Bulis, and I wrote the BBC Books story, The Ultimate Treasure.
Welcome back, Chris. Always a joy.
It's lovely to be here again, Kenny. Yeah.
So, Chris, we're talking about your fifth Doctor novel, The Ultimate Treasure, and this was your first novel for BBC Books. Do you remember how the whole commission for that came about?
Yeah, well, I've been discussing the scenario of The Ultimate Treasure with Virgin when they learned that they'd lost the Doctor Who franchise, and that will come to an end in May 1997. And I was sorry about that because I felt I built up a bit of a rapport with the team at Virgin. I'm very grateful for them supporting a Tyro author, as I had been when I began back in 1993. But if I wanted to write more Doctor Who, I had to prepare to change publishers. Now, some months before the end of the franchise date, I seem to recall that I, along with the other Virgin authors, of course, got a letter from BBC Worldwide explaining that they'd taken back the rights and what their plans were in inviting contributions. Now, it's always nice to be asked, and fortunately, of course, I already had something to offer them in preparation. I submitted the outline of The Ultimate Treasure, and after a few tweaks, I got an offer to publish it in October 1996, with delivery of the manuscript to be by mid-January 97. And I think I did meet that deadline. My new editor was Nuala Buffini, who very kindly obtained a special VHS copy of Planet of Fire, which had not been released commercially at the time, for reference purposes, because I wanted to see Perry's television debut and Chameleon's demise once again, which is obviously very relevant to my story. My name and the book title got a mention in a BBC press release that came out shortly afterwards, announcing the launch from the January 97 of, quote, a series of completely original stories about one of the most popular science fiction characters of all time, Doctor Who. They made it sound as if it was a totally new venture. No mention of the trailblazing work done by Virgin to prove the original story's idea was viable, and for helping some of the other writers the BBC listed in the release getting started, which I think was a little unkind. But at least now I was officially a BBC author.
You certainly were. I have a copy of said press release and press pack in my cupboard behind me. One of those wonderful things you get as a journalist and send off for it, and they used to send you these things back in the day, so yeah. Happy times and places. So this is a story with the Fifth Doctor and Perry. So what made you go with this partnership of Doctor and Companion?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure all these years later. I've been thinking about it, can't be certain, but I think it may be one of those times when I said to my editor, while I was still a Virgin, have you any Doctor Companion pair you'd like a story about for variety in the schedule? Or it may have been coming about from my looking over the TV episode list that they sent me when I started writing for them and seeing a potential gap which was unlikely to be filled by anybody else. Fifth Doctor and Perry only had 2 TV stories together. It felt to me as if it should have been a longer partnership. As a first trip, I thought the Doctor would have taken Perry somewhere cosmopolitan to introduce her to interstellar society. He chooses Astroville 7, a huge 31st century space trading post many light years away from her Earth. Perry goes shopping for souvenirs and soon discovers that things do not always go to plan when travelling with the Doctor. Because of the relative gloom inside the curio shop, Perry and the Doctor were actually several steps inside, with the door swinging closed behind them, before they properly took in the strange tableau of figures within. A creature about 7 feet tall, vaguely reminiscent of a bipedal rhinoceros, had its hands clamped murderously about the neck of a much smaller and inoffensive-looking alien, resembling the mock turtle from Alice in Wonderland, but with bunches of tentacles instead of flippers. Watching them were 2 humans wearing anonymous utility coveralls. Disconcertingly, she realised their faces were misty and blurred, almost as though they're out of focus, so she could see no details of their features. I think maybe we've come at a bad moment, Perry said faintly, stepping backwards so quickly a heel came down on the Doctor's foot. It seemed to her that, incredibly, the Doctor had noticed nothing amiss. Extracting his toe cap from under her heel, he beamed brightly at the oddly assorted figures and said cheerfully, "Hello, we were just looking for some early Etruscan miniatures. Not the Wedgwood Blues, of course, but the Van Gogh originals, with perhaps just a touch of Ming around the chasing." As he babbled this nonsense, he sauntered without apparent haste over to a basket of assorted coloured glass globes. He selected a fist-sized one, weighed it thoughtfully, and then spun about and threw it very hard and very precisely at the pseudo-rhino's head. It would have shattered the skull of a lesser being. As it was, the impact merely stunned the creature sufficiently for the little turtle-backed alien to wriggle free of his grasp. The taller of the two humans drew a wicked little snub-nosed pistol as Perry and the doctor dived for cover behind a massive couch built out of wooden balks the size of railway sleepers. The gun hissed and some sort of explosive projectile blew a large chunk of wood to splinters. Another shot dislodged a stack of shells, and a small avalanche of oddments cascaded to the floor. The basket of glass balls was upset and tumbled at their feet. Snatching up the ornaments, the doctor started pitching them at the gunman and his accomplices. Perry followed his example and began hurling every throwable object she could lay her hands on. In moments, the other side of the shop was being showered with fragments of bursting glass and china. Shots hissed and cracked in return. The noise level was startling. Then, without warning, a two-toned siren burst into life, adding to the din. Clouds of freezing vapour billowed out from the ceiling vents, filling the air with a dense white fog. There were indistinct crashes and angry shouts from within the opacity. A final shot rang out, then came the sound of running feet disappearing into the back of the shop, and a distant door banged. The siren cut off as abruptly as it had begun, and the fog began to disperse. Coughing, the doctor and Perry cautiously rose behind their refuge. As they did so, an amazing figure emerged out of the thinning mist from an alcove at the back of the shop. He was a rotund barrel of a man, with a white beard and moustache decorating his chubby pink jowls. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat with a red plume, a rough collar, and a scarlet doublet with slashed sleeves and breeches. A scabbard hung from the wide silver-buckled leather belt that encompassed his vast waist, while the naked blade itself was being brandished by its owner in flicks and slashes at the air, as though still spoiling for a fight. When it became apparent the intruders had fled, he lowered his sword with evident regret. "Ha! Eluded me in the fog, a plague upon them! Doubtless a scurvy knaves feared by steel." "Did you turn on the fire alarm?" the doctor asked. "I did indeed, sir. It seemed a little distraction was called for." By this time Perry had recovered a voice. "Sorry, but just who are you?" The man resheathed his sword and made a bow as low as his bulk allowed, doffing his cap with a flourish. "Sir John Falstaff, at your service, mistress." Perry found himself temporarily speechless once more. The doctor filled in the gap. "Really? And how did you arrive so conveniently, Sir John?" "Why, I had entered surreptitiously through the rear portal after the proprietor some time previous, having certain confidential matters I wished to discuss with him, but found the premises already infested with the 3 varlets you have already encountered. I was preparing to set about them when you made your own entrance. Naturally, I could not risk a confrontation with a lady present, so conceived a strategy involving the alarm panel situated in the passage there. But I pray, stay further expositions for the nonce. What of Hock? Did he depart with the others?" Perry looked about at the shambles of the shop interior. "I guess he must have." "Oh." A tentacle protruded from under an overturned cabinet. They rapidly heaved the debris aside, but it was clearly too late for the little alien. There was a bullet hole in the middle of the chest segment of his body shell, the plastron, as Perry remembered the analogous part was called on earthly animals. Hock's tentacles were twitching feebly, and the eyes in his wrinkled parody of a human face were beginning to lose their focus. From the doctor's look of sad resignation, she knew there was nothing they could do for him. Overcoming her queasiness, she took hold of the outstretched tentacles in her hand, offering what comfort she could. It felt cold and already lifeless. With a wheeze, Falstaff knelt beside Hock. "Did they get it? Hock, did they get it? It is I, Falstaff. Is there a duplicate? Tell me and I shall be your avenger. Speak, man." "Leave him alone," Perry protested. But Hock was struggling to speak. A hoarse whisper forced out with the last breath in his body, his words broken and barely comprehensible. "Ovens, Rishore, 385.06 by 946.573 by 157.67 positive. 385.06 by 946.573 Goodbye. The figures trailed away, and Hock lay still. Falstaff was scribbling on the back of his shirt cuff with a pen. Perry looked at the doctor in dismay and confusion. Suddenly became aware of a chatter of voices and shadows at the windows. Falstaff rose with a grunt. "Pray, please stay by the poor fellow. I shall secure the rear door." And he disappeared into the back of the shop, moving very quietly for such a big man. A head peered cautiously in through the half-open door. "Can you call the police, please?" the doctor asked its owner crisply. "There's been a murder."
Now, Chris, 2 observations there. There's been a murder, of course, was the catchphrase from Scottish crime series Taggart.
Right.
There's been a murder.
Aha. I wasn't consciously copying that, but great. I'm glad it ties in with something of interest to you.
And the other one is you've just gone and invented something for Doctor Who again, because you pretty much have invented the Judoon with a bipedal rhinoceros.
Yes, only after I was writing this out, checking it over, did I realise that did seem a bit like a Judoon, didn't it? I haven't made any connection with it. Obviously, I couldn't then. It didn't exist. I don't know whether I was there first for some reason. I don't know. I've no idea. But I said, yes, afterwards I think that's a bit like a Judoon, isn't it? Upright rhinoceros, but there we are. That could be just going. I presume. Yeah, well, there we are. He does speak better English than that, or whatever the interlingua they use. So, but there is an interesting parallel there. Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. Now, the core of this adventure is a quest story, which is something that I've been a huge fan of since I was a wee boy, and my dad's got me reading all the classics. So is that something you've always enjoyed too?
Of course I have. Quests of one kind or another abound in myth and folk tales from way back. An example being the stories of King Arthur's knights and their quest for the Holy Grail, which influenced much of what followed. A quest might be something tangible and probably precious, or at least less materialistically for self-knowledge or enlightenment. For whatever reasons the questers embark on their journey, it will change them in unexpected ways, in that it resembles a pilgrimage. It's not simply about the physical journey and reaching the destination, but the travellers overcoming adversity and confronting, for better or worse, the strengths and weaknesses of their own characters on the way. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson is a classic. Who can't be thrilled by those 2 words in combination that imply so much? We're drawn into the world of Jim Hawkins, Long John Silver, Squire Trelawney, Ben Gunn, Captain Flint, the Admiral Benbow Inn, the Hispaniola, and the passing of the Black Spot. Pirates in exotic locations, daring do, muskets and swordplay. Then there is H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines, which was only written due to a bet made with one of his brothers that he could write anything half as good as Stevenson's creation. And that gave us a desperate trek across a desert and through the mountains, a pitched battle between armies of native warriors, a place of death, a secret treasure chamber, and Alan Quatermain. The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle begins as a quest for scientific knowledge and vindication, taking 2 rival scientists, a titled adventurer and a newspaper reporter, into the heart of South America and a huge lost plateau inhabited by dinosaurs and fearsome ape men. That they also return with a hoard of diamonds is almost incidental. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is almost a reverse quest on a grand scale. The heroes have a kind of treasure from the start. Sauron's evil ring of power, the one ring to rule them all. The story relates their mission to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. Incidentally, these first examples all feature in their published forms maps of the lands involved, which I always feel adds to the appeal of a book. I recall wondering about putting a map in The Ultimate Treasure, but I thought it might give too much away. Moving on to harder SF territory, H.G. Wells' nameless traveller in The Time Machine goes on a quest to discover what he hopes is mankind's golden future, but finds only social decay and despair, and has a glimpse of the end of the world. The protagonists in the various iterations of Star Trek universes are on endless quest to seek out new life and new civilizations, etc. Then there's the oddly assorted party of explorers on their long flight across the vast expanse of Larry Niven's Ring World, an artifact with a surface area equivalent to 3 million Earths, trying to find a way of getting a damaged spacecraft safely off it. Finally, we come to the virtual quest of the Matrix, and Neo's search for the truth about the illusory world he inhabits, and if he truly is the One. Yep, quests abound in adventure stories. But every quest needs some initial motivation. What are the questions seeking the ultimate treasure? Answer: the lost treasure of Rowan Carterval. Perry finds an entry about him in the Asheville Library. Rowan Hathcourt Clement Delamain Carterval, born 6608 432.93 Galactic Time Index, 1973 BC terrestrial calendar, on planet Centros, capital of Cartervellian Stellar Empire, comprising some 50 systems and 2.8 times 10 to 11 subjects. First son of Emperor Dorian III and Empress Callier of Carterval. Became emperor in 608 465.04 GTI. Disappeared 608.46929 GTI during voyage to vacation world of Serenity, when he ordered all crew to leave his private yacht at a remote imperial outpost and took the vessel on a loan to an unknown destination. It was later discovered that he had secretly arranged for the contents of the palace treasury, estimated value in current terms 6.4 times 10 to the 12 stellar credits, to be loaded aboard his yacht before departure from Centros. Despite a multi-system search by the Imperial forces, neither Rowan nor his treasure were ever found. As Rowan had no offspring, he was eventually succeeded to the throne by his younger brother Athrun in 608 472.63 GTI. This event is often said to mark the beginning of the disintegration of the Cartervallian Empire. So, there's a vast treasure that disappeared 5,000 years before and was never found. Well, that's reason enough for some to seek it out, but not for all. In my story, Rowan's treasure means different things to different protagonists. For the crooked trio of Quaid, Gribbs and Trorg and Vess, a big pile of gems and precious metals would be reward enough. Marquis Roscarino, however, is looking to prove a lineal connection between his family and the ancient Carterval line, so they can inherit long-lost estates and resume their proper rank and position. Professor Thorin believes the ultimate treasure must logically be the secret of immortality. Falstaff is seeking a challenge to prove himself and overcome his deep-seated cowardice. Even reporter Dexel Dines is on a quest for the ultimate sensational news scoop. But the rewards the protagonists receive at journey's end are not necessarily what they set out to find, and their varied quests are resolved in unexpected and bittersweet manner. At the conclusion of the story, Perry is both moved and frustrated by this. "Are you disappointed?" the Doctor asked. "I'm not sure. Real life isn't always as satisfying as storybooks, is it? I thought I might have come away with something more to show for it all. No gold or jewels, not even a bumper sticker. I've been on the ultimate treasure hunt. Only a collection of bruises, about 5 years knocked off my life through fright, and a story no one believed back home." But, as she will come to realise, it was the taking part that mattered, the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Now, I think it'd be fair to say that, with the exception of the 5 Doctors, it had been a while since the Doctor had been given a proper quest story like this. And that gives the book something of a boy's own spirit. Is that a fair comment, would you say?
It is fair comment, but at the same time, not necessarily a bad thing. Why not have a more traditional boy's own style adventure once in a while? If we take it as an adjective to describe something that is exciting, heroic or daring. Now, I tried to alter the structure of each new story I wrote as far as possible, and a pure quest was a variation I'd not done before. There was a sort of mini quest within the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but this one is a real, full-on treasure quest which dominates the book. However, it's no light-hearted adventure. Rowan's treasure is administered by the mentalist priests of Gelsandor, and their speaker Shalvis, who explains the situation to the assembled questers. 5,000 standard years ago, Rowan came to Gelsandor with our contrivance. He has secretly negotiated with us to aid his disappearance, and we fulfilled our part of the bargain. I shall not speak of the exact details of our agreement, nor of the reasons why Rowan made his choice, but in compensation we became the guardians of his treasure. The careful use of a tiny portion of its total enabled us to maintain our independence and continue our studies into the science of the mind, some of the consequences of which you have already experienced. But Rowan knew there would be those, through the ages, who would come after him and his treasure, so we agreed how they should be received. We could quite simply erase all knowledge of the last few hours and send you away unaware that any such place as Gelsandor exists, but we choose not to. Rowan believed that courage and determination should reap their just rewards, as should greed and deceit. So his treasure lies at the end of a difficult, perhaps to some of you a deadly road. But any who survive may leave Gorsandal enriched, as was Rowan's intent. My inspiration for Rowan Cartmel came in part from the 1941 film Citizen Kane, in which an American named Charles Foster Kane gains vast wealth, but it does not bring him lasting happiness, and he eventually dies alone and embittered, uttering the final enigmatic name Rosebud. And no, I won't spoil things for those who have not seen it by explaining what that meant. But what was the significance of Rosebud to Kane? Despite his very well documented public and private life, nobody seemed to know. That mystery inspires a party of journalists to try to find the answer, and also spawns their own quest. Go see the film if you want to find out. At the time of recording, it's in the BBC iPlayer library, and it truly is a classic both of storytelling and cinematography. The character of Kane was generally thought to have been based on real-life newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, who tried to stop the film being made, and when it failed, ridiculed it. That shows both the power of fiction and the insecurity of wealth. Early on, there's a scene in Newsreel Report on Kane's life where men are shown wheeling crates along, carrying some items he had bought. It might have been parts of an entire Scottish castle he had acquired for shipment home to him. The crates were simply marked Kane, Florida, or Kane, Xanadu, the name of his vast private country retreat, which it was cribbed from Coleridge's poem Kubla Khan. And I've only just now, after all these years, realised the play on the respective names. How dumb is that? Anyway, it seemed to me that Kane was so famous by then that those few words were all the address necessary. What would it be like to be that well known? As the film showed, even owning a castle did not bring Kane joy, and his Xanadu was never completed and decayed about him as he declined in influence. So what, I wondered, might a fabulously wealthy man do to find true contentment? What would his ultimate treasure be? A great pile of precious metal and gems, a pleasure palace, or something more subtle, so that he avoided Kane's fate? But to answer that deeper, more philosophical question, my questers must complete their personal, physical and emotional journeys of discovery, which means doing all that boy's own stuff first. Blood, toil, tears and sweat precedes enlightenment.
Most definitely. Fantastic. No, I love the Citizen Kane allegory. Such a great film. It took me years to see it. I didn't see it until I was in my mid-20s, so... And then when I did...
I think it is just a timeless classic now. And, I mean, it's old-fashioned in some ways, but there's a power about it that I think anybody can appreciate, yeah.
Very much so. How did you find writing for this Doctor and Perry?
Well, I'd written for Perry before in State of Change, so I'd had some practice for the character. But this was my first story featuring the Fifth Doctor. I think I portrayed him reasonably well. He's gentler and less abrasive and more diffident than his predecessor, and I feel he would build up a rapport with Perry pretty quickly. He doesn't thrust himself into situations quite so recklessly and might be more compassionate, but underneath, of course, he's still the Doctor. After they witness the curio shop killing, Police Inspector Myra Johannes insists on examining the TARDIS berthed in Astroville's space dock and is amazed by its interior. What did you say it was called again? A TARDIS, the Doctor said brightly. And how does it all... She waved her hand uncertainly at her unlikely surroundings. Well, according to hyperdimensional engineering theory, space-time continua can be folded by the application of... Enough! I shouldn't have asked. I did say it was spacious, didn't I? Said Perry with a grin. Nothing illegal about having a spaceship which is bigger inside than out, is there? No, I just haven't seen anything quite like it before. You're welcome to search for anything linking us to Hock or his killers, said the Doctor, waving a genial hand to the archway that led to the rest of the ship. Any antiques you find are mine. Can you prove that? Inspector, the Doctor said with quiet dignity. I've had some of them since they were new.
That is very, very Peter Davison. I can hear him saying every single word there.
Thank you. I hope I captured his mannerisms, yes.
I'd imagine that when you're writing something like this, it must be quite difficult to come up with different traps and tricks for the group to face as they go through their quest. Like, everything can't be Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, in this instance, I'm pleased to say it wasn't too hard, actually, because in the past I collected some logic puzzle pages and features in books and magazines, and I extrapolated and adapted a few of them. They just had to be the sort of trap or obstacle that could be described clearly and fit into the physical circumstances on Gelsandor. Well, it helped that the quest was both ancient and well-funded, so logically the locals had the time and resources to reshape the landscape itself in places to suit their purposes. In the Wood of Lies, for instance, they have to deduce the right path to take when meeting a local who might or might not lie to them. It was a type of logic puzzle the Doctor had encountered before, but this time I gave the full reasoning and rightful credit to its original solver. The Doctor smiled. Fortunately, there is a solution. On Earth, it was originated in the mid-20th century by a philosopher called Goodman, although, of course, it's been independently discovered many times on many other worlds. We'll see if it works here. The Doctor walked over to the girl Sandoran. I believe you may or may not tell the truth if I ask you specifically which path leads to Roven's treasure. That is correct, Doctor. And have you already determined whether you will be one kind or another, that is, either a liar or a truth-teller in this matter? I have. Then tell me if you're the kind who would tell me that the right-hand path leads to Roven's treasure. No, I am not. The Doctor raised his hat politely and turned to the others. We'll take the left pathway, he said. When they had gone round the next corner, Perry asked, Now, how did you work that out? Well, if he was telling the truth when he said no, he wasn't the kind who would tell me the right-hand path was the correct one, and then the right-hand path would be wrong, since only a liar would say otherwise. If he had intent to lie, then he would say the right-hand path was the correct one in an effort to deceive me. Therefore, it would still be the wrong choice. If he said yes, meaning he was the kind who would tell me the right path led to the treasure, and he was telling the truth, then the right-hand path would have been the correct one. If he had said yes and he was lying, then he was actually not the kind who would say the right-hand path was the correct one, since only a truth-teller would say that, and so again the right path would have been correct, whether answering yes was the true or not. Either way, if he said yes, I would choose right, and left if he said no. I came across something similar on Mars once. It's very simple, really. Crossing a saw-toothed chasm with planks that seem too short to bridge is a logic and geometry puzzle I've seen in various forms. I added the razor-edge fence beams encountered earlier to give it another twist, seeming to provide the solution if the questioners think to go back for them, then apparently not being suitable because they were just too short and could not be bound together to extend them. Traversing the plane of hexagonal pitfall tiles safely involved the Doctor working out the rainbow colour sequence, although there were alternate methods for getting across as well, which some of the other parties used. Nobody thought of laying planks in series around the tile corners, though. The peril of the swamp of lotus eaters is an ancient type of trap for the unwary and goes back in myth thousands of years. How easy for a weary traveller to lay down and take a rest and stop worrying, but so much harder to focus and get back up again. The seemingly endless staircase up the fog-shrouded cliff was my own creation, assuming the engineering skills existed to build it, of course. Parties of questioners could work it out as described, but a single person might get trapped halfway up if they could not jam the moving stairs somehow. Strapping a backpack to a step might do it. If they did not think of that, could they run down faster than the stairs ascended? How long would they last until they decided to throw themselves off and hope to survive the fall into the lake below?
I was particularly interested in the character of Dines, given that I was a working journalist when this book came out. And now I'm a working comms officer, of course. But did you ever have any plans to bring him back thinking there's potential here?
Not at the time, no. He just seemed a natural choice to play a part later on in the story of Palace of the Red Sun, when he finally got his just desserts. But I hadn't any bigger plans earlier for him. Dines was fun to work with from the start, being a perfectly single-minded character. He's an interstellar reporter with apparently no morals, who will stop at nothing to get the big scoop. And he believes he has the law and the public hunger for a sensational story on his side, as he makes clear when he meets the other questers on Gelsandor. In through the doors strode a single figure. He appeared to be a slender human male, wearing what might have been a classically styled trench coat and fedora from 1930s Earth, except that they were raven black and trimmed with white piping. He was accompanied by an object floating at head height, which reminded Perry of an oversized frisbee. It moved with a barely inaudible hum and carried on its rim binocular camera lenses and what she guessed were compact directional microphones. It immediately began to drift about the chamber as though seeking different angles to film from, at the same time capturing close-up shots of everybody present. The man took one look about him as though rapidly assessing his surroundings, then strode up to Shalvis, pulling out a card from his pocket. Dexel Dines, Interstellar News Agency, announced crisply. In accordance with the Galactic Declaration of Freedom of Investigation, I claim the right of free and unrestricted access to witness, record, or otherwise report all newsworthy events on this planet in any way related to or concerning Professor Alexander Thorin and the Marquis de Roscarino and their associates or families, who I declare to be figures of public prominence and therefore exempt from the protection of Parts 1 and 2 of the Privacy of Sentient Beings Act 2830. And, he added righteously, something closed down my live feed to the INA net before I landed. Interference with press communications. Welcome, Dexel Dines, Shalvis said calmly. You may record whatever you wish without interference from us while you're on Gelsandor, and you're free to leave our world at any time. Those are the only concessions we grant you. There was something very final about her tone that Dines wisely did not challenge, and he took a vacant seat, scanning the rest of them with tense, unblinking eyes. Quaid, Gribbs and Drogon shuffled their feet and turned their heads away. Johannes looked disgusted. Falstaff brushed off the front of his rough collar, fluffed up his beard, and beamed. A reporter, Thorin exclaimed. This is absurd. Why, do you have something to hide, Professor? Dines asked, slipping easily into interviewing mode. The floating camera dropped down to point over Dines' shoulder, catching Thorin's full face. It is permitted, Shalvis said solemnly. In his way, he too is a seeker. Besides, he is only here because you are, Professor. He planted a tracking device in your ship while you were on Astroville. Dines showed surprise but no shame at the revelation. Thorin flushed angrily. What do you mean by spying on us? Just doing my job, Professor, said Dines. Followed you all the way from Altor. When two oddly matched characters like yourself and the Marquis get together and start acting secretly, there has to be a story in it somewhere. Remember, the public has a right to know. The flying camera glided away from Dines and resumed its steady circling of the chamber. It flew close to Perry, and she saw Drone Audio Visual Equipment Hatch 1 stenciled on its side. Its lenses focused on her, and she felt herself begin to grin at it in a foolish rictus of embarrassment. Back in the mid-90s, when I created Dines, there had been several scandals about unscrupulous reporting methods, illegal phone tapping and intrusive paparazzi, photographers and so on, and I was satirising both the hunger for an exclusive and the public appetite for sensational news stories and suggesting where it might lead. Today, of course, the pendulum has swung the other way, with some sympathy for journalists dying in conflict zones or trying to report the truth. To be fair, Dines would have gone such places as well if he could have got a big story. He was certainly no coward, and he did have some advanced technology to aid him in the form of his swarm of Dave camera drones. Dines contrasted well with other characters who showed more doubt and uncertainty. In an odd way, he's the happiest person there, right in the middle of a big story exclusive. But despite all his efforts, in the end, he's cheated of his scoop.
I do have an element of sympathy for him because of that. However, I was always a nice journalist.
Of course you were. No question about that at all.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking to me now.
No. Absolutely.
So you brought Chameleon back, sort of, in The Ultimate Treasure. Was this a way to sort of redeem him after his betrayal in Planet of Fire?
Well, I felt he had a lot of potential, but got a short shrift on TV because of the problems with the primitive cybernetic animatronic prop used to represent his true self. He might have become a very interesting regular companion if that had not let him down. Of course, in hindsight, it would be simpler to have a person in a costume to play the part of Chameleon's true form. But you could see the appeal of having an actual android on the programme. Since I wasn't constrained by the limitations of special effects, I had him adopt a form most useful to Perry. Not that she recognised him when he first appeared, while she was in the woods trying to escape from Gribbs. There was a rumbling growl from the bushes a few yards away. Perry had heard lions making similar noises in Africa, except this sound was far deeper, suggesting a creature of even greater bulk. Gribbs froze, and for a moment their eyes met in mutual alarm. She saw his hand slowly slide down to the butt of his holstered pistol. There came a crash and a swish of branches and a thud of heavy feet. Gribbs yelled as he half rose, drawing his gun. Perry had a blurred impression of a large body passing right over her, knocking Gribbs off his feet. There was a bony thud as he hit the ground and a double thump of the creature's feet setting down after him. Then there was silence, except for breath being drawn into huge lungs. Perry lay where she was, too frightened to look round after Gribbs, knowing she had got the strength to run far, and suspecting it would be useless to try in any case. Perhaps the creature would be satisfied with Gribbs, she thought selfishly. It would only be what he deserved after all. But there's no sound of a former jailer being torn limb from limb. Instead, the great footfalls got louder. Then the creature loomed over her. She'd never seen anything like it in her life. A white, barley-sugar-twisted horn that would have graced any unicorn rose from its forehead. Its snout was as long as a horse's head, but it was no herbivore, as the long canines protruding from its upper jaw suggested. Its eyes were large, deep, and intelligent. They looked out at her from what at first she took to be a contoured metallic blue mask, except that she could see no straps or other means of attachment. Its neck was also heavily armoured with overlapping metal bands and was equine in length, but more heavily muscled and covered with thick reddish fur. The great head dipped towards her, the large nostrils flared. She closed her eyes in alarm. There was a snuffling and sensation as though a vacuum cleaner hose was being run over her body. It was sniffing her. Cautiously she opened her eyes again, just as a long, wet, pink tongue emerged from the fearsome jaws and licked her neck and cheek in a friendly fashion. She squirmed away, breaking into a hysterical peal of relief laughter. "Stop it! That tickles!" The beast lifted its head and regarded her with patient interest. Slowly she got to her feet. With half an eye she noticed Gribbs lay crumpled against the base of a tree some yards away. She thought she could see him breathing, but evidently he was not going to be playing any active part in proceedings for some time to come. The beast was even more impressive seen in its entirety. If it had been a horse, she would have said it stood maybe 26 hands high at its shoulder. Of course, its broad three-clawed paws on furry white stocking-marked legs were not at all horse-like in articulation, nor was its long, heavy tail ending in a cluster of wicked spikes. The rest of its body was covered in more of the red hair and armoured plates, but she could still see no sign of any fastenings, almost as though they grew out of its body like some partial exoskeleton. Perhaps that sort of thing was quite common on Gelsandor. Yet natural evolution alone could hardly have explained what could only be a saddle that grew out of the beast's back, complete with integral side flaps and pocketed stirrups. "Well, you're quite something, aren't you, Red? Who do you belong to, then?" The beast tossed its head, but made no other response. Now she began to think furiously. It had to be a domestic animal she got loose, but somehow she couldn't see Shalvis and those other rogue monk types owning something so magnificent. Perhaps it belonged to some group of locals they had not yet encountered, who might be less involved with the quest. And if she could mount it, it might be encouraged to take her back to them. They would be bound to be grateful and might give her shelter. At least it would get her well away from Gribbs. As she pondered, Dave Force circled in to get a closer shot of her new acquaintance. "Oh, haven't you seen enough yet?" she said irritably. With remarkable speed for something of its bulk, Red twisted sideways and lashed out with one huge paw. There was a crunch of plastic, a dying crackle of sparks, and Dave Force lay crumpled on the ground. "I think we're going to be friends," Perry said with an approving smile. In his way, Chameleon was also a quester. He wanted forgiveness and a chance of redemption, and in the end, he got what he wished for.
Now, another memorable character that you created for this one is Sir John Falstaff. Here we have a man pretending to be a character from Shakespeare, but living in the 31st century.
Yeah, I made John Falstaff deliberately larger than life in every sense. A man who, for reasons of his own, hides his true self behind the facade of a more famous fictional persona. Falstaff is, like his fictional forebear, a liar, cheat, and pragmatic coward, but fun to write. I might not have been the first SF writer to borrow his character. I now see Falstaffian parallels with Giles Habibula from Jack Williamson's Legion of Space series that began back in the 1930s. Habibula was an old fat man who was always drinking and eating too much, self-pityingly protesting at every hardship and insisting he was wasting away. But he was also a skilled spaceship mechanic, a devious plotter, and could pick any lock. My Falstaff was not quite so talented, but he was a great survivor and teller of tall tales, as Perry and the Doctor discovered when they saved him from his sabotaged spaceship. "A remarkable contrivance you have here, Doctor," Falstaff said 5 minutes later, after they'd taken him and his few salvageable belongings on board. He had recovered his composure with remarkable speed. "'Twas most fortunate that you heard my hails, for I was beginning to give up hope of salvation, and commend my soul to God, and beg his understanding for any trifling transgressions I might have committed over the years. But now I can rest easy once more. Have you any decent food aboard? I'm a shadow of myself, bad enough to be so disabled by a device planted in such a knavish manner, but the blast destroyed my source of fresh victuals, since when I've had to survive on morsels that would not keep a church mouse alive." Perry, however, was in no mood to play along with his fancy. "You could drop the act. We know you're a phony," she said scathingly. Falstaff looked affronted and hitched his belt a little higher with massive belly. "You accuse Falstaff of being an impostor, Mistress Brown? What, old Jack? Never." "I think you should know we are familiar with the work of William Shakespeare," the Doctor said helpfully, "even if he is currently out of fashion in this part of the galaxy." To his surprise, it did not appear to trouble Falstaff. "Ah, so you've heard of my chronicler?" "Chronicler?" Perry exclaimed. "Certainly. I did not think such a man as Jack Falstaff could be conjured out of nothing by some pen-scratcher. The fellow used some license with my adventures, I grant you, but Falstaff was cut from whole cloth. Very soon he gets into full fancy mode. You bugged out, leaving us to explain everything to the police without anybody to back up our story," Perry reminded him. "Do I get no thanks for so masterfully saving your lives first? In gratitude there art truly marble-hearted. Besides, I was sure the matter was in capable hands, and I had to pursue those whoreson cutthroats to ensure they did not profit from their villainy." "Really?" said Perry dubiously. "Verily so. I was hard upon their tails when they turned like cornered rats. What a battle it was! 2 of their craft dived upon me, their lasers spitting fire." "You didn't say anything about a battle," Perry protested. "I thought they planted a bomb on your ship." "Nay, you misheard. 'Twas a battle royal that lay below. There were these 4 ships, armed like men of war." "I thought there were only 2 ships. Pray do not interrupt. I'll lose the thread of the tale. Now, 6 ships bore down upon me. Sir John, would you like something to eat?" said the Doctor brightly, stemming the flow. "Perry, please show our guest how to use the food synthesizer." He is an entertaining character. In the end, he does reveal the truth about himself and wins their sympathy and understanding.
He does. Indeed he does. So, this one came out just over 28 years ago. There's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So, how do you look back on it now?
On a strictly technical note, I was embarrassed to find a few glitches and silly errors in the text and obvious stylistic flaws, such as repeated words and sentences, none of which should ever have got through proofing 30 years ago. And yet they did. And even after rereading the book and looking over some passages several times in the process of selecting excerpts of this podcast, it was only once I printed up these notes that I caught them. Let that be a warning to any would-be writers out there: you can never do too much proofreading. Apart from that, I was pleasantly surprised when I reread it nearly 30 years later. Hangs together quite well, and I think it has enough twists and turns and invention to keep it interesting. Despite the story being conceived while I was writing for Virgin, it felt like a very different book by the time I completed it for the BBC. It was exemplified by their new cover style, featuring a photo headshot of Peter Davison instead of the painted imagery Virgin used. This was blended with a spiral swirling effect into the more distant head and neck of Red. I think I did a sketch of Red, which was used as a guide for this image, so I did have some cover input. And with BBC printed on the cover as a kind of seal of approval, I certainly felt I was a lot closer to the original series. As a story, The Ultimate Treasure is absolutely not the ultimate Doctor Who adventure, not the ultimate anything for that matter. It's just a work of fiction and should not be read as a template for real life. But its subject matter does perhaps inspire this thought. Few of us, either by chance or choice or need, will ever go on such an incredible journey, even a strictly earthly one, without the aid of Time Lords and aliens. It takes us all our time and energy to navigate our way through the struggles of everyday life. That is the quest we're all on, and it's quite challenging enough for mere mortals.
Indeed, Chris. Indeed. Fantastic. Really, really interesting. It sounds like you did enjoy going back to it.
I did. It was interesting. It did make me think again, and researching it and seeing now with more knowledge other links to other works of fiction or real life and so on makes it interesting, and it gives it a bit more substance and depth, perhaps, and not so disconnected. It is just a work of fiction, but you can relate to it maybe a bit more than I thought, which is nice to know. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Always a pleasure, Kelly. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, as ever, Chris. And we've already fixed up the next conversation that we're going to have. What will it be? Stay tuned, because he'll be back with us before too long. Now, let's pop over to Doctor Who magazine. And we're going to look at issue 255 to get the contemporary review and find out what Dave Owen thought of this book. Few things in life are utterly dependable, but alongside the sun continuing to rise every morning, 2 and 2 adding up to 4, and eggs being eggs, stands the certainty that every 6 months Christopher Bulis will have another Doctor Who novel published, and usually it's very good indeed. A complacency-shattering exception to the standard was his recent missing adventure Twilight of the Gods. The book's sheer inertia made it near impossible to start. It's almost the same with his latest, The Ultimate Treasure. Perhaps because the author's key skill is in distilling the essence of the era of Doctor Who he is working within, the setting with which the Fifth Doctor and Perry found themselves in jars horribly. Astroville, yuck, as Perry might say, is a typical mid-80s Doctor Who setting, but not for the television series, resembling instead the kind of location that Doctor Who Monthly, as it was then known, would strand the Doctor in. Grandiose and polycultural for the sheer sake of it, it fuels the dreams of those who feel that Doctor Who's greatest failing was its inability to replicate the cantina scene from Star Wars. Things improve as the setting moves to the hidden world of Gelsandor, where a number of parties are seeking, for reasons spanning sheer greed and political altruism, a mythical lost treasure. There are still a few Marvel-esque unshaven thugs whose utterances of "oh, boss" leave one uncertain as to which side of the Atlantic their ancestors came from, but they are far more acceptable in a setting where once again the story is the star, as it is in all good Doctor Who, rather than its locale. As in Bulis's earlier The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the author fuses the trappings of technology-driven SF with more fantastical themes. The Gelsandorans are like Doctor Who's original Time Lords, all-powerful and controlling, with technology so advanced that it is indistinguishable from magic, to quote Arthur C. Clarke's Third Law. Yet, the treasure seekers achieve their aims with a variety of advanced yet believable gadgets, and are even observed by a high-tech TV journalist via a team of surveillance drones, tastefully known as Daves. Those sharing my fondness for logic puzzles will also enjoy many of the ordeals the treasure seekers face in their quest. The author displays surplus ingenuity by having separate solutions from the parties being equally successful, and shows that the Doctor is not uniquely resourceful. I was reminded in turn of the City of the Exelons from Death to the Daleks, the riddle of the Osirans from Pyramids of Mars, and the perplexing topography of the artificial world in the aforementioned Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rarna. Perry is very well characterised throughout, but for much of the book I felt the Fifth Doctor to be pushed too far into the background. Then, in a late scene where, held captive and serving as an advisor to some of the less sympathetic bounty hunters, he is forced to give cautionary and compelling advice in a hurry to prevent imminent disaster. All of a sudden, I was reminded of Peter Davison's driven expression in the Caves of Androzani's final cliffhanger, and realised that this is how this Doctor functioned, hovering and only really being persuasive at moments of pressure. not only does this book capture the Doctor well, it reminded me of just how compelling, in every sense, he could be. The Ultimate Treasure is, appropriately, ultimately rewarding, despite never giving any of its characters the kind of identifiable depth that authors such as Andrew Cartmel or Russell T Davies might, and I suspect that Christopher Bulis has few aspirations towards their kind of real-life horrors, preferring to dwell within a nobler realm of abstract fantasy. Once there, he succeeds completely. So let's find out what contemporary readers think. Over on Goodreads, it's got a rating of 2.96 from 146 ratings and 15 reviews. Of those, 5 stars 9%, 4 stars 15%, 3 stars 43%, 2 stars 24%, 1 star 6%. Let's have a look at some of these reviews. 4 stars here from Tim. This one doesn't seem to get a lot of love, but I really enjoyed it. More of a fantasy novel with a quest element, with the Ultimate Treasure having 5 Doctors vibes. There's a 3-star rating from James Bowman. A generally entertaining tale focusing on the hunt for a legendary treasure through a series of challenges that felt akin to a Dungeons & Dragons adventure. This particular novel feels like it's more about the supporting cast than the Doctor and Peri themselves, however. While this probably works for the frequently passive Fifth Doctor, I wonder if this novel might have worked better as a First Doctor story. Of that supporting cast, the criminal group was the most interesting, though the others have their moments. There are a few unexpected developments throughout, but the quest ends in a not entirely unsurprising way. I'd been hoping for a grander twist. There's also a really random and unsatisfying return appearance from an earlier companion. I'm not sure what the point was. Overall, this is fun enough to read, but not likely to be memorable. There's a 3-star review from Chris. Chris says, a fun little adventure story, featuring a combination of Doctor and companion that didn't get very much time in the series. It's a little predictable and a little gun-happy, but I could imagine this as being an actual set of episodes. There's also a 3-star review from Leela42. 5th Doctor adventure, PDA, with the 5th Doctor Peri and a surprise guest. A pleasant read. An excellent Peri, and all the guest characters stand out with sharp personalities, unusual in Doctor Who original novels. However, one gets tired of homophone errors. And finally, there's a 1-star review here from Michael. Michael says, the usually reliable Bulis fires a blank this time. The Doctor joins a treasure hunt, along with a bunch of other characters, including a gang of baddies that would probably have been way too silly for Scooby-Doo. 3 books into the series, and I'm already starting to get nostalgic about the Virgin Range. Thank you, Michael. So there we go. Mixed reviews, but generally on the positive side. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a rating for us on your podcatcher of choice. Always welcome. We've not had one in ages. Go on, please. You can find us on social media. We're at Power of 3 Pod on Twitter, and we do have a Facebook group as well, where we'll share bonus content when we can. And so, we're at the end of another episode. And as ever, we're going to leave you with a tune. And we're going to go with one that was referred to earlier on by Chris when he was talking about his favourite Boy's Own adventures. So, we're going to play out with Jerry Goldsmith's Quatermain March from the film King Solomon's Mines from, I think it was 1985. So, over to you, Jerry. Until next time, I've been Kenny Smith. Bye-bye.